Today my guest is Matt Hester. Matt, how are you?
Hey, how are you doing, David?
I'm doing great, thanks. Matt, what do you do for Microsoft?
I'm an IT Pro evangelist, so my job is to work with the IT Pro communities in the Heartland territory, which is Michigan, Ohio, Kentucky, and Tennessee. Where you and I met was actually down in Tennessee at DevLink, I believe.
Even though you live in Texas?
Even though I live in Texas, and even though I'm an IT guy and they let me into the developer story. So, it's kind of cool. I get to do very similar jobs and just help work with the community on the IT side and help tell the infrastructure side of the story. I think we've done traditionally a great job with the developer community. Mm-hmm. My job is to grow that IT Pro community because I know they're out there and there's a lot of them.
Oh, sure. You had a great turnout this morning for your Azure in Action talk.
Yeah.
And in fact, I saw a lot of developers there, and I think it really resonated with developers.
Yeah, and what makes me feel really good is that when you have those same IT pros that hear the story and they want to hear it again from the developer side. So a lot of the people that were coming back this afternoon were actually people that came in this morning. So
I'll be one of them, yeah.
Yep.
So we're down here. And I also heard that you're writing a book.
Yeah, I'm actually, I was fortunate enough, Cybex has asked me to write a book on R2. Windows Server. Windows Server 2008 version R2.
Okay.
Kind of an administrative guide. It's going to be kind of stuff you do day by day. So I'm real excited about it. Hopefully be out sometime in January is when we're looking to be published, and we're just finishing the writing process today.
Does that mean that R2 will be out in January, the actual software?
Well, R2 is actually, Windows Server 2008 R2 will release the same day Windows 7 releases. So October 22nd, I believe, is the street date. They're on the same release cycle.
All right. So I haven't seen R2 at all. I've worked a little bit with just, I guess, do they call it R1?
Well, they just call it 2000. So Windows Server 2008, but you call it R1.
So R2, what's better about R2? What's new there?
Well, they've done a lot of things, and internally they improved some of the performance under the covers. So it's built on, and before it was named Windows Server 2008 R2, it was Windows 7 Server. So they really put some of the same enhancements we have in Windows 7 coming down the pipe forward to improve around the GUI and the interface.
Okay.
But when I look at R2 and I look at the improvements that they put in the server product, it really is designed to help administrators do their tasks better and faster. And it's not that you can't use the same tools that you've used in the past, but we're trying to design things to make things faster and easier to use and more intuitive than sometimes some of the administrative consoles that we've used in the past.
Give me some example of that. What's easier in the next release?
One of the things they actually put in was in an Active Directory. They put in a thing called the Active Directory Administrative Center, which is a GUI front end to the Active Directory users and computers container, where it's not really hard to create a new user. It's not really that hard to create a new group. But a lot of right clicks and navigating through the tree. Well, now what happens is you can actually make this and use a form, and they've actually made it a very task-based utility where you can search and query your Active Directory a little bit easier than we've done in the past. You can reset user IDs and passwords very easily. They actually have some of these built-in consoles. But it's also context sensitive. So for example, let's say if you have a user that locked out their account because they typed their password in wrong too many times. Sure. Everybody has that problem, if they don't have enough coffee in the morning, right? Yep. So what happens is, in Active Directory, you'd have to find that user or wait for that user to call. And you could track them down and right-click and go into the properties. Well, inside of the administrative console, you could simply put a query filter that says, show me all the enabled accounts that are currently locked out on my system. And it'll just pre-populate a list right there for you, and you can click on the account and a nice little unlock button becomes visible. So you can just automatically get right then and there. It's really designed, and one of the things I like to tell all the people I talk to is, hey, look, if you like using Active Directory using a computer, if you like using the command prompt or PowerShell, however you like to admin it, you're still going to be able to do it. This just gives an alternative, especially if you have to delegate some administrative tasks that people that may not be as familiar with the utilities that you are.
Sure. Okay.
So that's one way we're doing a lot of things inside of there. The other way is PowerShell is something that when you look at it from a perspective that it's the product that keeps getting improved, but nobody really seems to be using it yet.
I want to tell you that I finally, as a developer, had to install PowerShell because I was working with Velocity.
Yeah.
Velocity uses PowerShell as its configuration engine.
Yeah, and what's funny is PowerShell was written as a scripting engine for IT, but what I'm finding with all the people I talk to and the different folks that I run into in the different circles at DevLink and Days of .NET, and these different developers I'm running to, they seem to be more gaga over PowerShell than the average IT bear. Now, nothing to knock it, but I'm like, this is a tool that was designed as a scripting engine to help improve scripting for your servers for infrastructure tasks. And what I'm finding is developers like yourself and the developers I talk to are embracing it because either they have an application that needs it or they're using it to help deploy web apps across a farm very easily. PowerShell has gotten revved inside of Windows to even make it easier to learn. A couple things they did there. For pretty much every feature now inside of, or every solution or role inside of a Windows 2008 R2 server, there actually is a PowerShell commandlet support. The product groups actually have to create PowerShell commands to do things in the GUI. So everything you can pretty much do in the GUI for the IIS or AD, we now have PowerShell commandlets.
So now we can script that.
You can script it a lot easier. And for example, in PowerShell, in the first version in AD, you could actually, in Active Directory, you could actually create users, but you really had to know how to speak LDAP. You had to know how to configure that LDAP, the LDAP schema, the OU equals, contain, all the CNs and all that stuff. Well, now there's actually just an add-AD user commandlet that's built in, that was designed by the product group, that does all that front wag work for you. But they also did a couple clever things to make learning PowerShell a little bit easier. One of them is they actually installed a new feature, and it's something you can install after you have R2. It's called PowerShell Integrated Services Engine, or ISE. It's a new feature. It's actually a GUI front end to PowerShell. Now, what will really trip your brain is they use PowerShell to create it. So it's actually a GUI front end that allow you to troubleshoot. If you make your big PowerShell scripts and blocks, you can actually bring it in. Now, it's not as sophisticated as the Visual Studio 2008, where it has IntelliSense and the automatic typing.
But it's a design environment.
It's
an integrated design environment for PowerShell.
Yeah, very basic, because you can put in basic stop points and toggle points and debug points.
Oh, it's
so you can actually step through it. So you can write it, but it also has a front-end GUI where you can actually put in your commands natively, and there's a little output window that's right there that will actually show you your commands. So you can run everything inside the window for it. So you have a GUI front end to PowerShell now.
And it's a great learning tool as well, right?
Fantastic learning tool, because one of the things, the PowerShell, first off, has always had excellent online documentation. If you go to any command and usually just type in help, whatever the name of the commandlet is, and --full, it has a whole litany of here's all the switches you can use, here's how the switches are used. And by the way, here's 5 or 6 examples of that code doing certain tasks. Well, if you're in there, then you have to learn how to copy and paste with the command prompt. You have to right-click, mark, and hit enter to copy.
Sure.
Well, here you can do those same help commands inside this GUI, and you can just natively right-click and copy and actually start practicing with it. And that's how I learned PowerShell. I pick a task I want to do, and I figure out an example that's doing the similar task, and then I figure out how to retrofit it for my scenario.
Sure.
Real easy to do. So they've done a lot of great things inside of PowerShell to make it easier to use. They're leveraging the .NET framework a little bit better. There's actually some output controls that will actually give you GUI outputs for all the output that PowerShell can generate. Some really good stuff there.
We were talking earlier about this new version of IIS.
Yes.
Is that better?
Well, absolutely. Well, of course, it's a canned question. Softball. Yeah, it actually is. We have a new version that's coming out. It's IIS 7.5. It's going to be built on the server. They've done a lot of things inside there. One of the big things they're starting to do is put a lot more integration. And by the way, for the people watching and listening, if you didn't know you could run PHP applications on IIS, you could do that back in version 6. But the performance metric between running PHP with older versions of IIS and running PHP apps on Apaches was there was some performance hits. The earlier versions of IIS weren't generated to handle the CGI calls and then have the application support. 7.0 really did improve that in 2008. And R2 that they're starting to find is that with that integrated app, 7.5 has a really good story to tell. So they're constantly improving that interoperability story. Very good story. You can still run them on Apache, but if you have IIS, you might have an alternative for your PHP application.
Sure, it's a nice happy DLL you have to turn on, basically.
Yeah,
IIS.
Just like we do in Apache where you add those DLLs here, there's a fast CGI component. Now, the only thing I want to make sure that we're clear on is when you install PHP on top of it, and this will seem counterintuitive, you want to get the non-thread safe version, because the CGI components inside of IIS handles all that thread safe componenting. So if you have the thread safe version of PHP running on IIS, you're basically doing the same task twice. So one of the things, and you can actually learn about that at iis.net, they have a whole section on PHP. The other one, and this is more the geeky fun one, and you and I are into streaming media on the web. I mean, heck, we're doing this right now. And you saw this morning was that we're doing a lot of work with smooth streaming. A while back, we had a partnership with Akamai, and they do some really neat things about how do we handle compression and
sure,
how do you
content delivery network.
Yeah, how do you deliver that right? How do you deliver it in a fashion where today, users have to make that decision. Do I have a good bandwidth, low bandwidth, high? What bandwidth do I have? And the content provider will have out here in the cloud somewhere 3 different versions of that same file handled for this. Well, you shouldn't have to do that. You should be able to have one file or have those multiple files, but have the decision made based on how that bandwidth is currently working on that day. And what it does is it smooths out the streaming experience. So you don't have that max headroom chugginess that you have when you watch videos. And 7.5 is actually being built with that inside of it. So you can actually have the smooth streaming components to handle it. And there's a lot of great things on the web they can go take a look at. Once again, I would point them to iis.net, and if you just type in search on that website, Experience Smooth Streaming, it'll take you to a sample page. And you actually saw that today because it was with the open source video with the bunny.
Yeah, the bunny was cool.
Yeah, the bunny was cool. So they're doing a lot of things there to just make it more integrated, a lot easier to do. We've had the application pool since 7.0, so make it a lot more stable of an environment.
How about remote desktop? The features there?
Remote desktop is actually really changed. So we've used remote desktop connection to connect to servers. In Windows 2008, this was known as terminal services.
Right.
Well, we had several features come in 2008: terminal services gateway, terminal services web app, remote app. They were all called terminal services. Well, in 2008 R2, they rebranded it all. So we can't just leave it called terminal services anymore. So it's remote desktop services. So now instead of being terminal services gateway, it's now remote desktop services gateway. The reason I mention that is that if people have knowledge around R2 today, and they have information about the remote desktop, the terminal services there, it's just been renamed. It's the same feature. It works the same way inside of it, but they called it remote desktop services for an important component they did add in R2 that didn't exist in 2008. They actually added in a virtual desktop infrastructure component, or a VDI component, called Remote Desktop Virtualization Host. And what this allows your remote desktop server to do is actually broker a connection to a virtual system, to a Hyper-V virtualized hard drive. So you could have, let's say you have a Hyper-V server, and you have on the guest accounts, you have a Windows 7 client with all your applications to support your infrastructure. You can actually connect to the remote desktop virtualization host, and it'll forward your connection to that virtual system. So now your remote desktops can actually be virtualized guests on your remote desktop
So
server.
let me make sure I understand this, because I think I can do that today. I can have a virtual machine on the server, and it can be running terminal services, and then I can connect to that via terminal services. What extra do I get now with R2?
It actually connects you, well, so what you're doing there is you're connecting directly to that actual system. So what you can do now is you can actually connect to that pool of VHDs, or have that one VHD support multiple people. So you can actually have the differencing disks help control that, but you can also then turn on the spigots and actually do application virtualization. So now you can come in and say, okay, I don't need that whole host to show up, I just need the application to show up. And what remote desktop will actually show you is just the application through application virtualization.
And this is similar to Windows 7 application virtualization, which is popular for the backwards compatibility.
Extremely. With the XP mode stuff inside of there, and one of the things I showed last night that kind of blew people's brains out a little bit, I had IE8 running, and I actually had IE6 running side by side. But it was, and if people didn't know what I did, well, how'd you do that? Because you can't actually load IE6 on top of an IE8 box. You can't run multiple versions of Internet Explorer on the same thing. But XP mode allowed me to instantiate that copy.
So one of them was running virtually.
Yeah, but nobody, if you'd looked at both windows, you would not have known that one was running virtually.
And now you
moved
that same technology to the server, so you can connect to it via
So extend it out. Yep, and remote desktop connections will allow you to govern all that connection. You can even put it up on the remote desktop web area as well. So people now can access it. And it's something we put in 2008, where it's basically a web front end to terminal services. So it's a web front end remote desktop client. So they can actually double click on it. They get a dashboard they log into, they authenticate, and they'll see all the things that are available to get to. And all they have to do is double click on one. It'll bring up the app or the host or wherever they're happening.
They don't need anything on their local machine?
No, just a web browser. Just a web browser, yeah.
Okay, very nice.
So yeah, there's a lot of really cool stuff inside of there. One of my favorite ones that I ran into the other day, and it was something they didn't put until RTM, was for server core. If you've ever had to play with the 2008 server core box, changing things like the IP address, while not impossible, you had to remember all those net shell commands, net sh and adapter, and you had to really pipe it out to change IP addresses. It was just kind of a hassle of typing. You had to get syntax right. Well, if you have a server core today, if you just go into the command prompt and type in sconfig, they actually created, and this goes kind of old school, a DOS menuing system. It says, what do you want to change? You want to change the IP addresses, and you just go through a menu system and put in your configuration. You don't have to remember. They're trying to make these things just easier to do across the entire platform.
More intuitive.
More intuitive. Yeah, I got to use my favorite word, more intuitive. The great thing about this, and we talked about Azure today, and I'll just bring it up because it's fresh and sitting out there, is that a lot of the technologies that you're seeing built into R2 are either hopefully going to reach into the Azure platform that we have, or more importantly is all the development work that we're doing on the Azure platform. Some of these features are actually coming down into the products. boot from VHD, the XP mode stuff, the app virtualization, or stuff that they're learning on the cloud that's actually impacting these local server products as well.
That's a nice test for scalability if you start implementing it on these Azure cloud services.
Definitely.
And thousands and thousands of servers.
Yeah, it's amazing to me how big you can scale. But we had a great question today. Is, eventually the cloud has to end. We only have we have a finite limit of computing resources. How do we, and I can't fathom, a workload taking over 350,000 servers. I have trouble seeing that on my own brain.
We'll probably be retired by then.
Yeah,
maybe. I don't know.
I bet same time we run out of IPv6 addresses, right?
Could be, yeah. See that. Great. Anything else? Where can people learn more about Matt Hester?
People can learn more about it, Matt Hester, really off my blog, which is blogs.technet.com/MatthewMS. That's the biggest way you can get a hold of me or come out and see me when we come out and do live events. I normally post my schedule out there. I post all kinds of things, book of the month. I talk a lot about football out there, so a lot of different topics. Even talked about my Goofy marathon running. So for the people who've ever done Disney World running, I have a whole training guide out there if you want to go do the Goofy Challenge. But I do a lot of different things. That's probably the biggest and fastest way to get a hold of me. I've just started Twittering per Brian Prince and Jeff Blankenberg.
Following you.
Blankenberg.
Like 11 tweets.
yeah, I have like 11, and that's over like almost a year. So at Matthew Hester, I believe, is my Twitter URL or Twitter ID, or however Twitter. Just that's how you can tweet me. I can't guarantee I do a lot there. I'm still wrapping my brain around using that a lot. But yeah, it's an exciting world we're living in and how we can get connected to it. But yeah, my blog's probably the fastest, easiest way to get a hold of me.
All right. Matt, I learned a ton from you today. Thank you very much.
No, thank you, David. It's amazing kind of stuff. And when you start getting your friends involved with technology, I'm telling you what, your friends will be friends for life, and they'll be more technical savvy than you can ever imagine.